Hi, I'm Rachel Martinez, and I thought family meant support, encouragement, and having each other's backs. Instead, the morning I was supposed to hear back about my dream job, I watched my mother hand my sister the golden opportunity I'd worked 3 years to earn. She looked me dead in the eye, smiled sweetly, and said Ashley deserved it more because she had kids to feed. But here's the twist they never saw coming. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes the people trying to tear you down accidentally hand you the key to something even better. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the windows of my cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland, creating a steady rhythm that matched the nervous beating of my heart. It was a Thursday morning in November, the kind of gray Pacific Northwest day where the clouds hang so low they seem to press against your shoulders. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, laptop open, refreshing my email every 30 seconds, like some kind of digital slot machine addict. Today was the day Innovate Tech Solutions was supposed to announce their decision for the senior marketing manager position, and I'd been living on coffee and anxiety for the past week. 3 years. That's how long I'd been building toward this moment. 3 years of staying late at my current job, taking on extra projects, earning my Google Analytics certification on weekends, and networking until my cheeks hurt from forced smiles. 3 years of watching other people get promoted while I was told to be patient, to wait my turn, to prove myself just a little bit more. This position at Innovate Tech wasn't just a job opportunity. It was my launching pad into the career I'd dreamed about since college. I pulled my worn University of Oregon sweatshirt tighter around me and took another sip of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls seeming to close in with each passing minute. Through the thin walls I could hear Miss Stern next door watching her morning talk shows, the familiar chatter providing a strange comfort in my solitude. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe, my best friend since high school. Any word yet? I'm refreshing your LinkedIn profile every 5 minutes waiting for you to update your job title. Even through text, I could feel her excitement. Chloe had been my cheerleader through this entire process, helping me practice interview questions over wine and takeout Chinese food, listening to me rehearse my presentation about digital marketing strategies until she could probably deliver it herself. I typed back quickly, nothing yet. Trying not to lose my mind over here, her response came immediately. You've got this. They'd be crazy not to hire you. If only confidence worked that way. If only wanting something badly enough guaranteed you'd get it. I'd been the top performer at my current company for 2 years running, had increased their social media engagement by 340%, and had personally landed 3 major clients that brought in over $500,000 in revenue. On paper, I was exactly what Innovate Tech was looking for. But I'd learned the hard way that being qualified and being chosen weren't always the same thing. The interview process had been grueling but exhilarating. 4 rounds of interviews, including a presentation to the executive team where I'd outlined a comprehensive strategy for expanding their market reach. Daniel Brooks, the CEO, had leaned back in his chair at the end of my presentation and said, "Rachel, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need here." Patricia Wong from HR had walked me out personally, telling me they'd be in touch within the week. That was 8 days ago. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, the one from my college graduation where I stood between my mom and Ashley, all of us grinning at the camera. Ashley looked radiant in her bridesmaid dress from a wedding we'd attended that same weekend, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile bright and confident. Even then, she'd had this way of commanding attention, of making people gravitate toward her warmth and charisma. Mom had her arms around both of us, looking proud and hopeful. My 2 successful daughters, she'd captioned it when she posted it on Facebook that day. Looking at that photo now, I felt a familiar pang of something I couldn't quite name. Love mixed with frustration, pride mixed with exhaustion. Ashley had always been the golden child, the one who could charm her way out of trouble and into opportunities. She was 3 years younger than me but had somehow managed to make every achievement look effortless. High school valedictorian, full scholarship to Portland State, married her college sweetheart right after graduation. While I'd been grinding through entry-level marketing jobs and ramen noodle dinners, She'd been building what looked like a perfect life, but appearances, I'd learned, could be deceiving. Ashley's perfect marriage had crumbled 2 years ago when her husband decided he wasn't ready for the responsibility of their twin daughter. Now she was a single mom working part-time at a local boutique, struggling to make ends meet while trying to finish her business degree online. Mom reminded me of this regularly, usually followed by some variation of, "You're so lucky you don't have those kinds of responsibilities, Rachel. You can afford to chase your dreams," as if my dreams were somehow less valid because I didn't have children depending on me, as if the sacrifices I'd made, the late nights and missed social events, and carefully budgeted months, didn't count because I was only responsible for myself. My laptop chimed with a new email notification, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest, but it was just a promotional email from some online course platform. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center myself the way Chloe had taught me during one of her yoga phases. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The universe has a plan. Trust the process. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me look up. My neighbor across the hall was leaving for work, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors in a confident rhythm. She worked at some tech startup downtown, always dressed in sleek blazers and carrying a leather laptop bag that probably cost more than my rent. I envied her certainty, the way she moved through the world like she belonged everywhere she went. I checked my phone again. 10:47. The waiting was becoming unbearable, each minute stretching like taffy. I'd already cleaned my apartment twice, reorganized my closet, and updated my LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot Chloe had taken of me in Pioneer Courthouse Square. Everything was ready for good news. I just needed the good news to actually arrive. To distract myself, I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Dream Job Research and scrolled through the documents I'd compiled about Innovate Tech Solutions. Founded 5 years ago by Daniel Brooks, a former Nike executive who wanted to revolutionize how small businesses managed their workflows. The company had grown from 12 employees to over 200, with offices in Portland, Austin, and Denver. Their company culture emphasized innovation, collaboration, and work-life balance. Their Glassdoor reviews were glowing. Their mission statement talked about empowering entrepreneurs to turn their visions into reality. It was exactly where I wanted to be, the kind of place where I could use my skills to make a real impact, where my ideas would be valued and implemented. The salary they'd mentioned would finally allow me to stop worrying about every grocery bill, and maybe even start saving for a down payment on a real apartment, something with a bedroom that wasn't also my living room and office. My phone rang, the sudden sound making me jump so violently I nearly knocked over my coffee mug. Unknown number with a Portland area code. My hands shook as I swiped to answer. "Hello, this is Rachel." "Hi Rachel, this is Mark Stevens from Innovate Tech Solutions. I hope you have a moment to talk." My mouth went dry. This was it. This was the call I'd been waiting for. "Of course, Mark. Thank you for calling. I wanted to personally reach out to let you know how impressed we were with your interview and presentation. The entire team was blown away by your strategic thinking and your passion for digital marketing." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it through the phone. "Thank you so much. I'm really excited about the opportunity to contribute to Innovate Tech's mission." "That's actually what I'm calling about, Rachel. While we were incredibly impressed with your qualifications and experience, we've decided to move forward with another candidate for this particular position." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the room tilt slightly around me. "I see. I want you to know this was an extremely difficult decision. The candidate we selected brings a unique combination of experience and personal circumstances that aligned perfectly with what we're looking for right now. But Rachel, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a reflection of your abilities or your potential. You are incredibly talented, and I have no doubt you'll find an amazing opportunity soon." I managed to mumble something that sounded like professional disappointment and gratitude for the opportunity. Mark continued talking, something about keeping my information on file, and reaching out if other positions opened up, but the words seemed to come from very far away. After we hung up, I sat in the sudden silence of my apartment, staring at my laptop screen without really seeing it. 3 years of preparation, countless hours of work and hope and careful planning, All for nothing. I let myself sit with the disappointment for exactly 5 minutes, watching the rain streak down my windows and feeling sorry for myself. Then I closed my laptop, walked to my small bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. This wasn't the end of the world. It was a setback, a disappointment, but not a catastrophe. There would be other opportunities, other companies, other chances to prove myself. But first, I needed comfort food and my family. Despite everything, despite the complicated dynamics and the sometimes painful comparisons, Mom and Ashley were my people. They'd help me process this disappointment and remind me that my worth wasn't determined by any single job opportunity. I grabbed my keys and jacket, deciding to surprise them with lunch from Chen's Kitchen, the Chinese restaurant we'd been ordering from since I was in middle school. Mom always said there was nothing that couldn't be improved by their sesame chicken and Ashley's favorite shrimp fried rice. Maybe we could watch old movies and I could let them spoil me for the afternoon while I figured out my next move. The drive to Mom's house in the Riverside district took me through the heart of Portland, past the coffee shops and bookstores and quirky boutiques that made this city feel like home. Even in my disappointment, I felt grateful to live somewhere that valued creativity and individuality, somewhere that felt full of possibilities even on gray November days. Mom's house sat on a tree-lined street where every yard was carefully maintained, and every porch held some seasonal decoration. Hers had a wreath made of autumn leaves and small pumpkins that Ashley had probably helped her arrange. The house itself was a modest two-story craftsman with blue shutters and a front garden that Mom tended with religious devotion. It was the house I'd grown up in, where I'd done homework at the kitchen table, and learned to drive in the driveway and brought my first boyfriend to meet the family. I parked behind Ashley's silver Honda Civic and noticed there was another car in the driveway I didn't recognize, a sleek black sedan that looked expensive and out of place in our middle-class neighborhood. Maybe Mom had finally started dating again. It had been 4 years since Dad passed away from a heart attack, and Chloe and I had been gently encouraging her to get back out there. I balanced the bag of takeout containers and knocked on the front door, using the special rhythm we'd established when Ashley and I were kids. 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 more knocks. The tradition had stuck even though we were all adults now. Coming, I heard Mom call from inside, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. She opened the door with a smile that seemed a little too bright, a little too forced. "Rachel, what a wonderful surprise, honey. Come in, come in." Something felt off immediately. Mom was wearing her good blouse, the navy blue one she usually reserved for church or important occasions. Her hair was styled instead of pulled back in her usual ponytail, and she was wearing makeup even though it was barely noon on a Thursday. The living room looked unusually tidy, like she'd been expecting company. "I brought lunch," I said, holding up the bag. "Figured we could have a spontaneous family meal. I had some news to share, and I could use some mom hugs." "Oh, sweetie, that's so thoughtful of you." But instead of taking the bag or pulling me into one of her famous bear hugs, Mom stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable. "Actually, we're sort of in the middle of something right now. Maybe we could do lunch this weekend instead." That's when I heard Ashley's laugh from the kitchen, followed by a man's voice I didn't recognize. A professional-sounding voice, confident and warm. Mom glanced toward the kitchen nervously, then back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Who's here, Mom?" Before she could answer, Ashley appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, looking radiant in a way I hadn't seen since before her divorce. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something that looked expensive and perfectly tailored. Her hair was styled in loose waves, and she was wearing the pearl earrings that had been our grandmother's. "Rach," she moved toward me with that graceful confidence she'd always possessed, but there was something different in her smile, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. "What perfect timing. We were just talking about you." "Talking about me?" A man emerged from the kitchen behind Ashley, and my world tilted on its axis. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of presence that commanded attention. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and his smile was warm but professional. I knew that face. I'd spent hours researching that face, reading interviews and company profiles and Forbes articles. I'd practiced answering his potential questions, and imagining what it would be like to work for someone so successful and innovative. It was Daniel Brooks, the CEO of Innovate Tech Solutions. The man whose company had just rejected me was standing in my mother's kitchen on a Thursday afternoon, looking perfectly at home. "Rachel," Ashley said, her voice bright with excitement, "I'd like you to meet Daniel Brooks." "Daniel, this is my sister Rachel, the one I was telling you about." Daniel stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to making good first impressions. "Rachel, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Ashley has told me so much about you." I stood frozen in the doorway, the bag of Chinese food growing heavy in my hands, trying to process what I was seeing. Daniel Brooks was in my mother's house. Ashley was wearing our grandmother's pearls and introducing him like they were old friends. And something about the way Mom was hovering nervously in the background told me this wasn't a coincidence. "I'm sorry," I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant. "I don't understand. What's going on here?" Ashley and Mom exchanged a look, one of those silent communications that had always made me feel like an outsider in my own family. Finally, Ashley stepped closer, her expression shifting to something that might have been sympathy if I didn't know her better. "Rachel, honey, I know this might come as a surprise, but Daniel reached out to our family because he was impressed by your application to his company." My brain felt like it was moving through molasses. "Reached out to our family?" "The thing is," Mom said, jumping in with the kind of forced cheer she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "Daniel explained that while they were very impressed with your qualifications, they realized they needed someone with a different background for this particular position, someone with more life experience." "Life experience," I repeated slowly. Daniel cleared his throat, his professional demeanor and "What your mother and sister are trying to explain, Rachel, is that after reviewing all the candidates, we realized this position would be better suited for someone who understands the challenges of balancing career growth with family responsibility. The role involves managing client accounts for small businesses, many of which are family-owned or run by working parents." The pieces were starting to come together, creating a picture so devastating I almost couldn't believe it was real. "And Ashley has that experience. Ashley has been incredibly honest about her journey as a single mother trying to build a career," Daniel continued. "Her insights into the challenges facing working parents would be invaluable in this role. Plus, her background in business, even though she hasn't finished her degree yet, combined with her natural interpersonal skills, makes her an ideal candidate." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her carefully composed expression. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't Daniel Brooks randomly deciding to visit our family. This was orchestrated, planned, deliberate. "Ashley applied for my job," I said quietly. "Not exactly," Mom said quickly. "She reached out to express interest in the company after hearing about your interview process. And when Daniel realized what a perfect fit she would be, you gave her my contacts," I continued, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "You gave her information about the company, about the position, about my interview." Ashley's composure cracked slightly. "Rachel, it's not like that. When you told us about the interview, I started researching the company, and I realized it might be a good fit for me too. I reached out independently, with information I shared with you. Information that's publicly available," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. I turned to Daniel, this man I'd admired from afar, whose company mission statement I'd memorized, whose leadership philosophy I'd quoted in my interview. "So you're here to tell me in person that you're hiring my sister instead of me?" Something flickered across his face, possibly discomfort, possibly regret. "Rachel, I want you to understand that this decision wasn't made lightly. Your qualifications are impressive, truly, but business decisions have to be made based on the best fit for the specific needs of the position. And my sister is a better fit because she has children, because she has experience navigating the exact challenges our target clients face every day," he corrected gently. "That lived experience is incredibly valuable in a client-facing role." The bag of Chinese food slipped from my numb fingers, the containers hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud. Sweet and sour sauce began seeping through the paper bag, creating a dark stain on Mom's carefully maintained floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. "Rachel," Ashley said, stepping toward me. "I know this is hard to understand, but this opportunity could change everything for me and the girl. You're young, you're single, you have time to build your career. I need this now. I've been building my career for 3 years," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working toward this specific opportunity for 3 years. And there will be other opportunities," Mom said, her tone taking on the slightly patronizing quality I remembered from childhood arguments. "Ashley's situation is more urgent. She has responsibilities you don't have." There it was, the fundamental difference in how my family saw my life versus Ashley's. My dreams were hobbies, luxuries I could afford to postpone. Ashley's needs were immediate, urgent, more important, because she was a mother. I looked around the living room, at the family photos covering every surface, at the careful arrangement of throw pillows on the couch, at the way Daniel Brooks stood there in his expensive suit, waiting for me to gracefully accept my dismissal. This was my family. These were the people who were supposed to support me, encourage me, celebrate my successes. Instead, they had handed my dream job to my sister and expected me to smile and congratulate her. "Congratulations, Ashley," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I hope the job works out well for you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I turned toward the door, stepping carefully around the spreading puddle of sauce on the floor. Behind me, I heard Ashley call my name, heard Mom say something about not leaving angry, heard Daniel Brooks clear his throat awkwardly, but I didn't stop walking. Outside, the November air felt sharp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of the house. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the rain create patterns on the windshield. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "How did it go with your family? Are they helping you process the job news?" I started laughing then, a sound that was probably closer to hysteria than humor. Process the job news. If only she knew. As I drove back toward my apartment, through the familiar streets of the city I'd thought I was building a future in, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. Not just my career prospects or my relationship with my family, but something deep. The person who had walked into that house an hour ago, disappointed but determined, was different from the person driving away. That person had still believed that family meant unconditional support. That person had still thought that working hard and playing by the rules would eventually pay off. That person had still trusted that the people who claimed to love her would never deliberately sabotage her dreams. But sometimes the most important lessons come disguised as the worst days of your life. And sometimes the people you think you know best are capable of surprising you in ways that change everything. I had no idea that in 24 hours my phone would ring with a call that would make this entire devastating afternoon look like the best thing that had ever happened to me. I had no idea that losing this job was about to become the first step towards something bigger and better than I'd ever imagined possible. But that's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes it's not an ending. Sometimes it's just a really solid foundation to build something new. The next morning arrived with the kind of relentless sunshine that felt almost mocking after the storm of the previous day. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at my ceiling and replaying every moment of that devastating encounter at Mom's house. The image of Ashley in our grandmother's pearls, standing next to Daniel Brooks like she belonged there, kept flashing through my mind like a cruel slideshow. I dragged myself out of bed around 7, my body feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The apartment seemed smaller somehow, the walls pressing in with the weight of my shattered expectations. I made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar ritual providing a small anchor in the chaos of my thoughts. Outside my window, Portland was waking up with its usual rhythm. People hurried past on the sidewalk below, clutching their coffee cups and checking their phones, all of them moving forward with purpose while I felt completely adrift. My phone sat on the kitchen counter like a loaded weapon. I'd turned off the notifications after receiving 17 text messages and 4 voicemails from Mom and Ashley overnight. I wasn't ready to read their explanations or their justification. I wasn't ready to hear about how this was all for the best, how families should support each other, how I was being dramatic and selfish. The coffee tasted bitter, but I forced myself to drink it anyway. I needed the caffeine, needed something to help me think clearly about what came next. The rational part of my brain knew I had to start job hunting again immediately. The industry moved fast, and staying stagnant even for a few weeks could set me back months. I needed to update my resume, reach out to my network, start researching other companies that might be looking for someone with my skills. But the emotional part of me felt completely deflated. How do you bounce back from discovering that your own family orchestrated your professional humiliation? How do you trust your instincts about people and opportunities when the people closest to you had been working against you behind the scenes? I was halfway through composing a text to Chloe when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, another Portland area code. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, especially not someone trying to sell me something or collect a debt. But something made me answer. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the hope that someone somewhere had good news for me. Hello, this is Rachel. Rachel Martinez. The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. This is Patricia Wong from Innovate Tech Solutions. I hope I'm not calling too early. My heart stopped. Patricia Wong, the HR manager who had walked me out after my presentation, who had seemed genuinely impressed with my ideas. Why was she calling me now? Had something changed? Had they realized they'd made a mistake? No, not at all. Good morning, Patricia. Rachel, I'm calling because something very unusual has happened, and I wanted to speak with you directly. Are you available to talk for a few minutes? I sank onto my couch, gripping the phone tighter. Of course. Yesterday afternoon, after the decision was made to offer the senior marketing manager position to another candidate, I received a very interesting phone call. It was from someone claiming to be your mother, asking detailed questions about our hiring process, and whether family recommendations carried any weight in our decision-making. The coffee cup slipped from my other hand, hitting the floor with a sharp crack. Hot liquid splashed across my bare feet, but I barely noticed the burn. My mother called you? She did, and the conversation was quite enlightening. She explained that she had encouraged your sister to apply for the same position you interviewed for, and she wanted to ensure that we understood the unique value your sister could bring to the role as a working mother. I couldn't speak. I literally could not form words. The betrayal was even deeper than I'd realized. It wasn't just that they had conspired behind my back. It was that Mom had actively lobbied against me with my potential employer. Rachel, are you still there? Yes, I whispered. I have to tell you, in 15 years of HR work, I have never received a call quite like that one. Your mother was very passionate about advocating for your sister, but some of the things she said raised significant red flags for our team. What kind of red flag? Patricia's voice took on a careful, professional tone. She implied that you had shared confidential information about our interview process with your sister. She suggested that your sister's application was somehow connected to insider knowledge of what we were looking for. And she made several comments about your personal life and priorities that were frankly inappropriate and concerning. I felt like I was drowning. Each word Patricia spoke pulled me deeper underwater, into a reality so much worse than anything I'd imagined. Patricia, I need you to know that I never shared any confidential information with my sister. I mentioned that I was interviewing with your company, but I would never compromise the integrity of your hiring process. I believe you, Rachel, and that's actually why I'm calling. I sat up straighter, something in her tone cutting through my shock. What do you mean? After your mother's call, I decided to do some additional research. I contacted your previous employers, spoke with people in your professional network, reviewed your portfolio more carefully. What I discovered was a candidate with an impeccable reputation, outstanding references, and a track record of ethical behavior that speaks for itself. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. I appreciate that, Patricia, but I'm not sure I understand why you're telling me that. Because I also looked more closely at your sister's application. and I discovered some troubling inconsistencies. The room seemed to tilt around me. Inconsistency. Her resume claimed experience with several digital marketing platforms that she later admitted in her phone screening she had never actually used. She listed skills in data analysis that she couldn't demonstrate when asked specific questions. And most concerning, she provided references who, when contacted, had never actually worked with her in a professional capacity. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. She lied on her resume, it appears, and when we confronted her about these discrepancies yesterday afternoon, she became defensive and eventually admitted that she had embellished her qualifications because she felt her personal situation made her deserving of the opportunity. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Ashley, my charming, confident sister, who could talk her way into anything, had fabricated her professional experience to steal my job. The same sister who had always been the golden child, who had always gotten what she wanted through sheer force of personality, had resorted to lying when her charm wasn't enough. Rachel, I'm calling because we would like to offer you the senior marketing manager position. The words hung in the air like something from a dream. I was sure I had misheard. Sure that the stress of the past 24 hours had finally caused me to snap completely. I'm sorry, what? The job is yours if you want. Your qualifications are exactly what we need. Your presentation was innovative and well-researched, and your professional reputation is stellar. We made a mistake in our initial decision, one based on incomplete and misleading information. We'd like the opportunity to correct that mistake. I stood up so quickly I felt dizzy, pacing to my kitchen window and staring out at the street below without really seeing it. But Daniel Brooks was at my mother's house yesterday. He told me personally that Ashley was a better fit for the role. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Rachel, I think there are some things you need to know about yesterday's events. Would it be possible for you to come in this afternoon? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Yes, I said immediately. Yes, absolutely. What time? How about 2 o'clock? And Rachel, bring a copy of your portfolio. We'd like to discuss not just the marketing manager position, but some additional opportunities that might interest you. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen in complete silence, trying to absorb what had just happened. The job was mine, the position I'd worked 3 years to earn, the opportunity that had been ripped away by my own family's machinations, was being offered to me after all. But more than that, it sounded like there might be even bigger opportunities on the horizon. I looked down at the broken coffee cup on my floor, the dark stain spreading across my cheap linoleum, and started laughing. Not the hysterical laughter from yesterday, but something lighter, more genuine. It was such a perfect metaphor for my life in the past 24 hours. Everything had shattered, made a mess, looked irreparable, but maybe broken things could be cleaned up. Maybe damage could be undone. I spent the next hour cleaning up the coffee, showering, and choosing my outfit carefully. The navy blue dress that had served me well in the original interview, paired with the blazer Chloe had helped me pick out, professional but not stuffy, confident but not arrogant. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in a corner office, someone who could handle whatever opportunities Patricia was hinting at. As I was gathering my portfolio materials, my phone buzzed with another text from Ashley. Rachel, please call me. This is all a huge misunderstanding. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't rushing to smooth over a conflict with my family. I wasn't apologizing for my feelings, or trying to see their side of things. Whatever conversation Ashley wanted to have could wait until after I understood exactly what had transpired yesterday and what it meant for my future. The drive to Innovate Tech's offices in the Pearl District gave me time to think about the implications of Patricia's call. If Ashley had lied on her resume and been exposed, there would be consequences beyond just losing the job opportunity. In a city like Portland, where the tech and business communities were tight-knit, word of something like this could spread quickly. Her reputation, her ability to find legitimate work in the future, could be seriously damaged. Part of me felt a stab of guilt at that thought. Despite everything that had happened, Ashley was still my sister. She was still a single mother trying to provide for her daughter. I didn't want to see her hurt or struggling, even if she had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. But a larger part of me felt something harder, colder. Actions had consequences. Choices had repercussions. Ashley had chosen to lie, to steal, to manipulate her way into an opportunity she hadn't earned. If that choice came back to hurt her, it wasn't my responsibility to protect her from those consequences. The Innovate Tech building was a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. I'd admired the architecture during my first visit, had imagined myself walking through these halls every morning, being part of the creative energy that seemed to hum through every corner of the space. Now, as I walked through the lobby toward the elevators, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu mixed with possibility. Everything looked the same as it had during my interview, but my perspective had shifted completely. I wasn't the hopeful candidate anymore, nervous and eager to plead. I was someone who had been wronged, who had fought back, who had emerged victorious despite the odds. Patricia met me in the lobby herself, which felt significant. During my original interview process, I'd been collected by junior staff members and escorted through the building like a visitor. Now the head of HR was personally greeting me, treating me like someone important. "Rachel, thank you so much for coming in on short notice. I know yesterday must have been incredibly difficult for you." She was younger than I'd expected from her voice, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of polished professionalism that comes from years of navigating complex workplace dynamics. Her handshake was firm, her smile warm but serious. "I appreciate you reaching out," I said. "To be honest, I'm still trying to process everything that's happened." "That's completely understandable. Why don't we go up to my office, and I can walk you through what we've discovered?" The elevator ride to the 5th floor was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Patricia's office was corner space with windows facing Mount Hood, furnished with modern but comfortable furniture that managed to be both professional and welcoming. She gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing her desk, then closed the door behind us. "Rachel, before we discuss the job offer, I want to make sure you understand exactly what happened yesterday, and why we're reversing our initial decision." She opened a thick folder on her desk, pulling out several documents that I couldn't see clearly from my angle. "As I mentioned on the phone, your mother's call yesterday raised several red flags, but what really prompted us to investigate further was a follow-up call we received about an hour later. A follow-up call from Daniel Brooks, our CEO. My confusion must have been obvious because Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Rachel, Daniel was not at your mother's house yesterday to offer your sister a job." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? He was there because your sister had been calling our offices repeatedly, claiming to be you. She had somehow obtained detailed information about your interview process, and was using it to try to schedule a meeting with Daniel direct. When that didn't work, she started calling his assistant, claiming there had been a mistake in the hiring process, and that she was supposed to receive an offer." I felt the blood drain from my face. She was impersonating me, initially. When that didn't work, she switched tactics and started claiming to be your sister, saying that you had asked her to follow up on your behalf because you were too embarrassed to call yourself after the rejection. The room was spinning slightly. Every revelation was worse than the last, painting a picture of deception and manipulation that went so much deeper than I'd realized. Daniel's assistant finally put her through to him directly, thinking there might be some legitimate family emergency or miscommunication. Your sister then told him an elaborate story about how you had been struggling with depression and self-esteem issues, and that you had asked her to apply for the position because you didn't think you were qualified enough. "That's not true," I said quickly. "None of that is true. But she was very convincing, very emotional. She painted a picture of a family crisis, of you being too fragile to handle the rejection, of her stepping in to help support you financially by taking a job you supposedly didn't want." I covered my face with my hands, trying to process the scope of Ashley's lies. She hadn't just stolen my opportunity, She had attempted to destroy my professional reputation in the process. Daniel, to his credit, was concerned enough about this story that he decided to meet with your family in person to understand the situation better. He wanted to make sure you were okay and to see if there was any way the company could help. So he went to my mother's house to check on my mental health. Exactly. And what he found there was very different from what your sister had described. Patricia pulled out another document. This one with Daniel's letterhead at the top. Daniel called me immediately after leaving your mother's house yesterday evening. He was deeply concerned about what he had witnessed. She handed me the document, and I recognized Daniel's signature at the bottom. It was a formal memo, addressed to Patricia and copied to what looked like the entire executive team. I read the memo twice before the full implications sank in. Daniel had documented everything. Ashley presenting herself as if she lived in the house rather than just visit. Mom treating her like the favored daughter while barely mentioning me. Ashley wearing what appeared to be expensive new clothes and jewelry that didn't match her claimed financial situation. The way both of them had spoken about me with a combination of pity and dismissal that had made Daniel increasingly uncomfortable. But most damning of all was the final paragraph, where Daniel described Ashley's reaction when he had asked direct questions about her professional experience. When pressed for specifics about her marketing background, she had become evasive and defensive. When he had asked her to explain some of the strategies she had claimed in her application, she had been unable to provide coherent answers. He realized she had fabricated most of her qualifications, I said quietly, and he realized that the family dynamic he was witnessing didn't match the story she had told him about you being too fragile to handle the job. In fact, it appeared to be the opposite. You seemed to be the capable, independent one, while your sister was the one displaying manipulative and concerning behavior. I set the memo down on Patricia's desk, my hands shaking slightly. So what happens now? Now we offer you the position you should have received in the first place, the senior marketing manager role at the salary we discussed during your interview, with a start date of your choosing. The relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with something darker, anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness about what this meant for my relationship with my family. There's something else, Rachel, something I think you should know before you make your decision. I looked up at Patricia, bracing myself for whatever new revelation was coming. While we were investigating your sister's background, we also took a closer look at your qualifications. Not because we doubted them, but because we wanted to make sure we fully understood what we had almost lost. She pulled out my portfolio, the one I had submitted with my original application, now annotated with sticky notes and additional documents. Your strategic proposal for expanding our client base in the Pacific Northwest. Daniel presented it to our board of directors yesterday evening. They want to implement it immediately. They want to implement my presentation. They want to implement it, and they want you to lead the initiative. Rachel, we're not just offering you the marketing manager position anymore, we're offering you the chance to create and lead an entirely new department focused on regional expansion. I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. A new department? With your own team, your own budget, and a salary that reflects the scope of the responsibility. This isn't just about filling a position anymore, Rachel. This is about building something from the ground up, based on your vision and your expertise. The magnitude of what she was offering began to sink in. Not just the job I had originally applied for, but something bigger, more challenging, more rewarding than anything I had dared to imagine. Why? I asked. Why go this far for someone you barely know? Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Because yesterday reminded all of us why character matters in business. Your sister had impressive interview skills, charming personality, and the ability to present herself well. But when the pressure was on, when she thought she could get away with it, she chose to lie and manipulate rather than compete fairly. She gestured toward my portfolio. You, on the other hand, have spent 3 years building a reputation based on hard work, integrity, and genuine expertise. When you were rejected for reasons that weren't fair, you didn't lash out or try to sabotage anyone else. You just quietly absorbed the disappointment and prepared to move forward. I don't know about that, I said. I was pretty angry yesterday, but you didn't act on that anger in a destructive way. And that tells us everything we need to know about the kind of person you are and the kind of employee you'll be. I looked out Patricia's window at the city skyline, at the mountains in the distance, at the view that could potentially be part of my daily life if I said yes to this opportunity. Everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed about, was being offered to me on a scale I hadn't even known was possible. But accepting it would mean stepping fully into a new chapter of my life, one where my family's betrayal was the catalyst for my success. It would mean acknowledging that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who force us to become stronger than we ever thought we could be. I need to ask you something, Patricia. What happens to my sister? What happens when word of this gets out? Patricia's expression softened slightly. That's not really our concern, Rachel. Your sister made her choices, and now she'll have to live with the consequences. Our responsibility is to our company and to the employees who demonstrate the values we want to promote. But she has children. She's struggling financially, and those are real challenges that deserve sympathy. But they don't excuse lying, manipulation, or attempting to destroy someone else's reputation. Compassion can't come at the expense of justice. I knew she was right, but the knowledge didn't make it easier. Despite everything Ashley had done, despite the depth of her betrayal, she was still my sister. The thought of her facing professional consequences that could affect her daughter's well-being was painful, even if it was deserved. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. But Rachel, I want you to know that this opportunity won't wait indefinitely. The board is excited about moving forward with your expansion plan, and they want to start as soon as possible. How long do I have? Can you give me an answer by Monday? That would give us time to start putting the pieces in place for a January launch. I nodded, standing up and shaking her hand. I'll call you Monday morning. As I walked back through the Innovate Tech offices, past the collaborative workspaces, and the innovation labs, and the coffee bar where employees were chatting and laughing, I tried to imagine myself as part of this world, not just as an employee, but as a leader, someone building something new and important. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I looked different somehow, more serious, more confident, more like someone who belonged in corner offices and boardrooms. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who had walked into my mother's house yesterday, hoping for comfort and support. That woman had been naive enough to believe that family loyalty was unconditional, that hard work always paid off, that playing by the rules guaranteed fair treatment. This woman knew better. This woman understood that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of betraying you, and that success often comes not despite the obstacles in your path, but because of how you choose to overcome them. As I drove home through the Portland afternoon, past the food trucks and the bookstores and the coffee shops that made this city feel like home, I realized I had a choice to make that went far beyond accepting or rejecting a job offer. I had to decide who I wanted to be, going forward, what kind of relationships I wanted to maintain, and how much of my energy I was willing to invest in people who had proven they didn't have my best interests at heart. My phone buzzed with another text from Ashley, then another from Mom. I didn't read them. Whatever they had to say could wait until I had figured out my own path forward. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to make a major decision based entirely on what was best for me, without considering how it might affect their feelings or their plans. The apartment felt different when I walked in, lighter somehow, despite the broken coffee cup I still hadn't fully cleaned up. I sat on my couch and pulled out my laptop, opening a new document to start making a list of pros and cons, of questions I needed answered, of considerations that would help me make the right choice. But as I stared at the blank page, I realized I had already made my decision. The moment Patricia had described the scope of the opportunity, the chance to build something from scratch based on my own vision and expertise, I had known what I was going to do. I was going to say yes. I was going to take the job, lead the new department, and prove that talent and integrity were more valuable than charm and manipulation. I was going to build a career that made me proud, regardless of whether my family understood or supported my choices, and I was going to do it all without apologizing for prioritizing my own success and happiness for once in my life. Friday morning arrived with an urgency I hadn't felt in months. I woke up before my alarm, my mind already racing with plans and possibilities. The weight of Patricia's offer had settled into something concrete overnight, transforming from an overwhelming surprise into a challenge I was eager to embrace. I had 48 hours to give them my answer, but in my heart I already knew what that answer would be. I spent the morning researching everything I could find about regional expansion strategies in the tech industry. If I was going to accept this opportunity, I wanted to hit the ground running with ideas that would justify their faith in me. My laptop screen filled with articles about market penetration, competitive analysis, and client acquisition strategies. This wasn't just about proving myself anymore. This was about building something meaningful, something that would establish my reputation in the industry for years to come. Around 10, my phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The third time it happened, I answered cautiously. Rachel Martinez. Yes, this is Rachel. Hi, this is Jennifer Walsh from Portland Business Weekly. I'm calling because we received some interesting information about a situation involving Innovate Tech Solutions and some concerns about their hiring practices. Would you have any comment on allegations that the company discriminated against candidates based on family status? My blood turned to ice. I'm sorry, what allegations? We received a tip that Innovate Tech initially offered a position to a single mother, then rescinded the offer in favor of a candidate without children. The source claims this represents a pattern of family status discrimination that violates Oregon employment law. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar knot form in my stomach. Ashley wasn't just content to lose gracefully. She was trying to destroy the company that had exposed her lies, and she was using me as ammunition. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding, I said carefully. I can't comment on ongoing employment matters, but I would encourage you to verify any information you've received with official sources before publishing anything. So you're not denying that you were passed over for a position that was offered to your sister? The question was loaded with implications I didn't like. How much did this reporter know? How much had Ashley told them? And how much of it was true versus her own twisted version of events? I'm not confirming or denying anything. If you want accurate information about Innovate Tech's hiring practices, I suggest you contact their HR department directly. After I hung up, I immediately called Patricia Wong. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense in a way that told me she'd been expecting this call. Rachel, I'm so glad you called. We've been fielding media inquiries all morning. A reporter just called me asking about family status discrimination. Patricia, what has happened? Your sister has apparently hired an employment attorney and filed a complaint with the state labor board, alleging that we discriminated against her based on her parental status. She's claiming that we initially offered her the position, then illegally rescinded it in favor of a childless candidate. The audacity of it took my breath away. Ashley had lied her way into consideration for a job she wasn't qualified for, been caught in those lies, and was now claiming discrimination when the consequences caught up with her. But that's not what happened at all. We know that, and we have extensive documentation to prove it. But Rachel, I need you to understand something. This kind of allegation, even when it's completely baseless, can be damaging to a company's reputation. We're going to fight it vigorously, but it's going to be a distraction. Are you rescinding the job offer? Absolutely not. If anything, this situation has reinforced our confidence in you, but I wanted you to know what you'd be walking into if you accept the position. There may be media attention, legal depositions, public scrutiny of your professional background. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the gray Portland morning. In the distance I could see Mount Hood rising above the clouds, solid and unchanging despite the weather swirling around its base. Sometimes you had to weather the storm to appreciate the view from the summit. Patricia, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Do you think I should be worried about my reputation, about how this might affect my career long term? She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling in the background. Rachel, I've been in HR for 15 years. I've seen employees weather much worse scandals than this. The key is always the same: truth and professionalism. If you conduct yourself with integrity, if you focus on your work and let your results speak for themselves, this will blow over. And if I don't take the job, if I decide this is too much drama and walk away, then Ashley wins. She doesn't get the position she lied to obtain, but she succeeds in destroying the opportunity for you too. She gets to play the victim in the media while ensuring that neither of you benefits from this situation. The clarity of that perspective hit me like a physical force. This wasn't just about choosing between career opportunities anymore. This was about choosing whether to let Ashley's manipulations define the trajectory of my professional life. If I walked away now, I would be letting her betrayal have lasting power over my future. I need to call you back, I said. Give me 30 minutes. Take all the time you need. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, trying to process the rapid escalation of events. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern had been finding another job after being rejected by Innovate Tech. Now I was facing the possibility of media attention, legal proceedings, and public scrutiny of my personal life, but I was also facing the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to build something significant from the ground up, the chance to prove that competence and integrity could triumph over manipulation and lies. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Ashley. I know you're angry, but you need to understand that I'm fighting for both of us. They can't treat our family this way. I stared at the message for a long moment, then blocked the number without responding. Ashley could reframe her actions however she needed to in order to sleep at night, but I wasn't going to enable her delusions. She wasn't fighting for both of us. She was fighting to avoid the consequences of her own choices, and she was willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. The next text came from Mom. Rachel, please call me. This whole situation is getting out of hand. We need to talk as a family and figure out how to fix this. I almost laughed at the word fix, as if this was some minor misunderstanding that could be resolved with a heart-to-heart conversation over coffee. As if the fundamental trust that had been broken could be repaired with apologies and explanation. Instead of responding, I opened my laptop and started researching employment law, media relations, and crisis management. If I was going to navigate this situation successfully, I needed to understand all the potential pitfalls and how to avoid them. I needed to be prepared for every question, every allegation, every attempt to paint me as either a victim or a villain. By noon, I had filled a notebook with strategies and talking points. I understood the legal framework around family status discrimination, the burden of proof required for such claims, and the typical timeline for state labor board investigation. I had researched other cases where employees had faced similar media scrutiny and analyzed how they had managed their public image. Most importantly, I had convinced myself that the truth was my strongest asset. Ashley could manipulate facts and play victim in the media, but the documentary evidence was clear. Her lies were provable, her behavior was documented, and her current legal strategy only served to highlight her willingness to prioritize her own interests over honesty and fairness. At 12:30, I called Patricia back. I accept the position, I said without preamble. When do I start? I could hear the relief in her voice. Are you sure, Rachel? This isn't going to be easy. I'm sure, but I have some conditions. Name them. I want to be fully briefed on the legal situation and any media strategy the company is planning. I don't want to be blindsided by reporters or attorneys. I want to know what's happening every step of the way. Absolutely. What else? I want to start immediately. Not in January. Not next week. Monday morning. If we're going to weather this storm, I want to be productive while we're doing it. I want to be so busy building this new department that I don't have time to worry about Ashley's theatrics. I love that attitude. Anything else? Yeah, I want to document everything, every conversation, every decision, every strategy session. If this situation does escalate, I want a complete record that shows I was focused on my job and professional responsibilities, rather than personal drama. Smart think. We'll make sure you have everything you need. After we finalized the details of my start date and initial responsibilities, I hung up feeling something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine excitement about my future. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. Yes, Ashley's legal maneuvering would create complications and distractions, but underneath all of that noise was the solid foundation of an incredible opportunity. I was going to lead the Pacific Northwest expansion initiative for a company I respect. I was going to build a team, develop strategies and create something meaningful, and I was going to do it all while proving that character and competence mattered more than manipulation and victimhood. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through my neighborhood, partly to celebrate and partly to clear my head, before the intensity of the coming weeks began. Portland in November had a particular beauty, the last burst of fall colors before winter settled in for good. The air was crisp and clean, and the city felt alive with possibility. As I walked past the coffee shops and bookstores that lined my street, I found myself imagining how different my life would be in 6 months. I'd be leading a team of professionals, traveling to client meetings, presenting strategies to boards of directors. I'd be the kind of person who belonged in corner offices and conference rooms, someone whose opinions carried weight, and whose decisions affected the success of real businesses. But more than that, I'd be someone who had faced betrayal and adversity, and chosen to rise above it, rather than be diminished by it. I'd be someone who had refused to let other people's bad behavior dictate the boundaries of my own success. My phone buzzed with a call from Chloe, and for the first time in days, I answered with genuine enthusiasm. "Tell me you have good news," she said immediately, "because I've been stress-eating chocolate croissants all morning, thinking about how devastated you must be about this job situation." "I have incredible news," I said, and launched into the entire story: Patricia's call, the revelation about Ashley's lies, the job offer, even the legal complications that were now emerging. Chloe listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of shock or disbelief. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Holy shit, Rachel, I know. Your sister tried to destroy your career and accidentally handed you the opportunity of a lifetime. That's one way to look at it. That's the only way to look at it. This is like something out of a movie. The villain's plan backfires spectacularly, and the hero gets everything she ever wanted. I don't know if I'm the hero in this story. Are you kidding me? You're absolutely the hero. You're the one who worked hard, played fair and maintained your integrity, even when the people closest to you were stabbing you in the back. You're the one who's going to turn this mess into something amazing." Her confidence in me was both touching and empowering. For so long I had defined myself in relation to my family, measuring my worth against their expectations and priorities, but Chloe saw me as an individual, someone with unique talents and potential that existed independently of my role as a daughter or sister. "What are you going to do about your family?" she asked. "I don't know yet. I can't imagine having a normal relationship with them after this, but I also can't imagine cutting them off completely. You don't have to decide that right now. Focus on the job, focus on building your new life, and let the family stuff sort itself out over time. You're right, I just feel guilty about Ashley's kids. They're innocent in all of this." "Ashley's kids are her responsibility, not yours. You can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, even if those people are family." After we hung up, I continued my walk with a lighter heart. Chloe was right about my priorities. I had spent too many years managing other people's emotions and consequences, trying to be the responsible one who held everything together. It was time to focus on my own life, my own goals, my own success. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a restaurant I'd been wanting to try for months, but had always considered too expensive. I sat at the bar with a glass of wine and a plate of perfectly prepared salmon, watching the kitchen staff work with the kind of focused intensity I hoped to bring to my new role. As I ate, I drafted a mental timeline for my first 90 days at Innovate Tech: team building, market research, competitive analysis, client outreach strategies. I would need to establish credibility quickly, not just because of the expanded scope of my role, but because of the scrutiny that would inevitably come with the legal situation. But I was ready for that challenge, more than ready. I was hungry for it. Around 9 o'clock, as I was walking back to my apartment, my phone rang with a call from a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. Tyler Rodriguez, a former colleague who had left my current company to join a startup in Seattle. We'd stayed in touch sporadically, mostly through LinkedIn updates and the occasional text about industry news. "Rachel, I just heard through the grapevine that you're joining Innovate Tech. Congratulations. Word was already spreading, which meant the tech community was smaller and more connected than I'd realized. Thanks, Tyler. How did you hear? My new company works with some of their vendors. Daniel Brooks mentioned at a conference today that they were expanding their Northwest operations and had just hired someone brilliant to lead the initiative. When he described the candidate's background, I had a feeling it might be you. The fact that Daniel was already talking about me publicly, describing me as brilliant, sent a warm rush of validation through my chest. It's been a crazy week, but I'm excited about the opportunity. You should be. Innovate Tech is one of the most respected companies in the region. Landing a leadership role there is huge, especially for someone our age. Our age was 30, which felt both young and ancient depending on the context. Young to be leading a major initiative at a growing company, but ancient when I considered how much of my 20s I'd spent working toward this moment. Tyler, can I ask you something? Have you heard any industry gossip about employment issues at Innovate Tech? Any rumors about discrimination or legal problems? Nothing specific, but I did hear something weird yesterday about an employee making complaints to the labor board. Why? I gave him a carefully edited version of the situation, focusing on the professional aspects rather than the family drama. Tyler listened thoughtfully, asking a few clarifying questions. Honestly, Rachel, this sounds like someone who got caught in lies and is now trying to create a distraction. In my experience, when people file discrimination complaints immediately after being rejected for legitimate reasons, it's usually because they know they don't have a strong case for anything else. That's what I'm hoping. Plus, the fact that they offered you an even better position afterward kind of undermines any claim that they discriminate against qualified candidates. If anything, this whole situation probably demonstrates how much they value competence and integrity. After we hung up, I felt more confident about my decision to move forward despite the complications. The industry professionals I respected saw this situation the same way I did, as evidence of my qualifications rather than proof of some conspiracy against me. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and started working on a formal resignation letter for my current job. 2 weeks' notice, professional language, expressions of gratitude for the opportunities I'd been given. I wanted to leave on good terms, partly because it was the right thing to do, and partly because maintaining positive relationships throughout the industry would be crucial for my long-term success. As I wrote, I found myself reflecting on the strange trajectory that had brought me to this point. 48 hours ago, I had been devastated by rejection and betrayal. Now I was crafting a resignation letter to accept a promotion that exceeded my wildest expectations. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about timing and justice. I saved the letter to my desktop and closed the laptop, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction about the day's work. I had made my decision, set my course, and taken the first concrete steps toward a future I was genuinely excited about. Tomorrow I would submit my resignation and begin preparing for the challenges ahead. I would research my new team, develop initial strategies, and prepare for whatever media attention or legal complications might arise from Ashley's continued maneuvering. But tonight, I was content to sit in my small apartment, looking out at the city lights of Portland, and appreciate the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of the world 3 days ago was actually the beginning of something better than I had ever imagined. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you are actually the best things in disguise. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down accidentally push you toward heights you never would have reached on your own. And sometimes the family that abandons you is just making room for the professional family you're about to build, the team that will value your contributions and support your growth in ways your blood relatives never could. As I prepared for bed, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years, not just about my career prospects, but about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. Ashley's betrayal had forced me to see myself clearly, to recognize my own worth independent of family approval or validation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and probably new complications, as Ashley's legal strategy played out in the media, but I was ready for all of it. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself first, and it felt absolutely liberating. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a new beginning. I walked into the Innovate Tech building at exactly 8 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio that Chloe had given me as a congratulations gift, and wearing the charcoal gray suit I'd splurged on over the weekend. The security guard at the front desk already had my new employee badge ready, complete with a photo that made me look confident and professional rather than terrified and overwhelmed. "Welcome to the team, Miss Martinez," he said with a genuine smile. "Miss Brooks asked me to escort you directly to the executive floor when you arrived." The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt like ascending to a different world. Gone were the collaborative workspaces and casual meeting areas I'd seen during my interview process. This floor was all polished marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about success. Daniel Brooks met me at the elevator doors himself, extending a hand that conveyed both warmth and respect. He was dressed more casually than when I'd seen him at my mother's house, in dark jeans and a button-down shirt that somehow managed to look both relaxed and authoritative. "Rachel, I can't tell you how pleased we are to have you here. I know the circumstances that brought us to this point have been challenging, but I hope you'll find that the end result makes it all worthwhile." "Thank you, Daniel. I'm excited to get started." He led me down a hallway lined with awards and recognition plaques, past conference rooms where I could see early morning meetings already in progress. The energy in the building was palpable, the kind of focused intensity that comes from people who genuinely believe in the work they're doing. "Before we dive into the specifics of your role, I want to address the elephant in the room," Daniel said as we approached a corner office with my name already engraved on a temporary placard. "I know you're aware of the legal situation your sister has initiated. I want you to know that we're handling it with the seriousness it deserves, but we're also not going to let it distract us from the important work ahead." My office was larger than any workspace I'd ever had, with windows facing both the city skyline and Mount Hood in the distance. A standing desk had been positioned to take advantage of the natural light, and a small conference table suggested that I'd be hosting meetings with clients and team members. "This is incredible," I said, walking to the windows and taking in the view. "You'll be spending a lot of time here over the next few months, so we wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable. Patricia will be joining us shortly to go over some administrative details, but first I wanted to give you a sense of the scope of what we're building." He opened a leather folder and spread several documents across the conference table: market research reports, competitor analyses, projected revenue models, and organizational charts that showed the structure of the new department I'd be leading. "We're not just talking about a few new hires and a modest expansion budget," Daniel continued. "We're talking about establishing Innovate Tech as the dominant player in the Pacific Northwest market within 3 years. We're talking about opening satellite offices in Seattle, Spokane, and potentially Boise. We're talking about a revenue stream that could represent 30% of our total business by 20. The numbers were staggering. The projected team size, the marketing budget, the client acquisition targets, all of it was bigger than anything I'd imagined when I'd originally applied for the simple marketing manager position. "Why me?" I asked, the question that had been nagging at me since Patricia's call on Friday. "I appreciate the confidence, but I've never led anything close to this scale before." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Rachel, I've been in business long enough to recognize potential when I see it. Your original presentation wasn't just good, it was visionary. You identified market opportunities that our internal team had missed, developed strategies that our consultants hadn't considered, and presented it all with a clarity and confidence that told me you weren't just regurgitating business school theories." He pulled out a bound copy of my original presentation, now annotated with notes and comments from what appeared to be multiple reviewers. "But more than that, the way you've handled this situation with your family has demonstrated exactly the kind of character we need in a leadership role. You've been betrayed, manipulated, and publicly attacked, and your response has been to focus on professionalism and moving forward rather than getting dragged into the drama. I'm not sure I deserve that much credit. There have been moments when I wanted to fight back, to defend myself publicly. Of course there have been, but you didn't act on those impulses. You trusted the process, trusted that the truth would eventually surface, and prepared yourself to succeed regardless of the obstacles. That's the mark of someone who can handle the pressure of building something significant." Patricia Wong knocked on the office door, carrying what appeared to be several thick folders and a laptop. She looked more serious than she had during our previous conversations, but her smile was warm as she greeted me. "Good morning, Rachel." Ready for the full briefing. The next 2 hours were a comprehensive introduction to not just my new role but the complex web of legal and public relations challenges that would form the backdrop of my early months at Innovate Tech. Patricia had prepared detailed timelines, media monitoring reports, and response strategies that demonstrated just how seriously the company was taking Ashley's allegations. "The good news," Patricia explained, "is that her complaint lacks any factual foundation. We have documentation of every step in our hiring process, recordings of the phone calls where she misrepresented herself, and witness statements from multiple employees who observed her behavior. The challenging news," Daniel added, "is that employment discrimination cases can take months to resolve, and the media attention can be unpredictable. We need to be prepared for the possibility that this story will resurface periodically as the legal process moves forward." They showed me copies of Ashley's formal complaint, which painted a picture so distorted from reality that it would have been laughable if it weren't potentially damaging to both my reputation and the company. According to her version of events, she had been the primary candidate for the marketing manager position, had received verbal assurances of an offer, and had been rejected only after the company discovered her parental status. "She's claiming that I was hired as retaliation against her for filing the complaint," I said, reading through the document with growing disbelief. "Which makes no sense chronologically," Patricia pointed out. "We had already decided to offer you the enhanced position before she filed anything. But logic isn't always the strongest element in these situations. What does this mean for me practically? Are there things I can't do, places I can't go, people I can't talk to?" "Just the opposite," Daniel said. "We want you to be as visible and successful as possible. The best defense against allegations of discrimination is demonstrating that our hiring decisions are based on merit and results. The more effectively you perform in this role, the more obvious it becomes that we made the right choice. Plus," Patricia added, "if you keep your focus on professional excellence and let your work speak for itself, any attempts to portray you as the beneficiary of unfair treatment will fall flat." They walked me through a media strategy that was both comprehensive and surprisingly aggressive. Rather than hiding from potential negative coverage, Innovate Tech planned to proactively showcase the expansion initiative and my role in leading industry publications, business conferences, professional networking events, all designed to establish me as a thought leader in regional market development. "Won't that seem like we're trying too hard to justify the hiring decision?" "It might, if we were promoting someone without qualifications," Daniel replied, "but we're promoting someone with exactly the right qualifications, at exactly the right time." The expansion initiative was already in development. "Your presentation accelerated our timeline and improved our strategy, but we weren't creating a position out of thin air to avoid discrimination claims." By 10 o'clock I had a clear understanding of both the opportunities and the challenges ahead. The legal situation would be a distraction, but it wouldn't be allowed to derail the important work of building the new department. My job was to focus on recruiting the right team, developing client relationships, and executing the expansion strategy with enough success to make any other considerations irrelevant. "One more thing," Patricia said, as we wrapped up the briefing. "We've arranged for you to work with a media consultant, someone who can help you prepare for potential interviews or public statements. It's not that we expect problems, but we want you to feel confident if the situation requires you to speak publicly. And Rachel," Daniel added, "I want you to know that you have the full support of our executive team and our board of directors. This isn't just a job for you, it's an investment in the future of our company. We believe in your potential, and we're committed to giving you every resource you need to succeed." After they left, I sat alone in my new office, surrounded by market research and strategic plans, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just been presented to me. 6 months ago I had been a mid-level marketing coordinator hoping for a promotion. Now I was sitting in a corner office on the executive floor of one of Portland's most respected tech companies, preparing to lead an initiative that could define the trajectory of my career. My first official meeting was scheduled for 11 o'clock with the human resources team, that would help me recruit my new department. I spent the interim reviewing the organizational charts and position descriptions, familiarizing myself with the roles I'd need to fill and the qualifications I'd be looking for. The recruiting meeting was both energizing and daunting. We discussed hiring timelines, salary ranges, and candidate sourcing strategies for positions, ranging from entry-level analyst to senior client relationship manager. By the end of the year, I'd be responsible for a team of 12 professionals, with plans to double that number by the end of the following year. The key, explained Janet Morrison, the head of talent acquisition, is finding people who share your vision for what this department can become. Technical skills can be taught, but passion and strategic thinking are harder to develop. What's the typical timeline for building a team this size? Under normal circumstances, 6 to 8 months. But given the high-profile nature of this initiative and the competitive job market in Portland, we're planning to accelerate that timeline significantly. We want to have core team members in place by January so you can begin client outreach immediately. And the budget for recruitment, generous. Daniel has made it clear that this expansion is a top priority, and that includes investing in the best talent available. After lunch, I spent the afternoon in strategy sessions with the existing marketing team, learning about current client relationships, ongoing campaigns, and the internal systems I'd need to understand to be effective in my new role. Everyone I met was welcoming and professional, but I could also sense an underlying curiosity about the circumstances that had led to my rapid ascension within the company. We heard there was some drama with the original hiring process, said Mike Chen, a senior marketing coordinator who had been with Innovate Tech for 3 years. Something about a discrimination complaint. There were some allegations that turned out to be unfounded, I replied carefully, but I'd prefer to focus on the work ahead, rather than relitigating past misunderstandings. Fair enough. We're just excited to have someone leading the expansion who actually understands the market. The previous candidates we interviewed seemed to think Portland was just a smaller version of San Francisco. By 4 o'clock my head was spinning with new information, new responsibilities, and new challenges, but underneath the overwhelm was a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of professional environment I had dreamed of joining, the kind of place where ideas mattered, where innovation was encouraged, and where success was measured by results rather than politics. I was packing up my laptop when my office phone rang. The caller ID showed an external number I didn't recognize. Rachel Martinez. Miss Martinez, this is Tom Bradley from Channel 8 News. I'm working on a story about employment practices in Portland's tech industry, and I was hoping to get your perspective on some recent allegations against Innovate Tech Solutions. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the company regarding legal matters. You should contact our public relations department. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you personally. We understand that you're at the center of a discrimination complaint filed by your sister. Our viewers would be interested in hearing your side of the story. The media attention was starting, just as Patricia and Daniel had warned it might. I appreciate your interest, but I don't have any comment at this time. Are you concerned that this complaint might affect your new position at the company? As I said, I don't have any comment. Thank you for calling. I hung up and immediately called Patricia to report the media contact. She listened calmly, asking a few questions about exactly what the reporter had said, and how I had responded. You handled that perfectly, she said. We expected this kind of attention, and your response was exactly right. Professional, brief, and focused on directing them to official channel. How many more calls like that should I expect? Hard to say. It depends on whether Ashley continues to seek media attention, or if the story gains traction on social media. But Rachel, remember that you're not fighting this battle alone. We have a communications team, legal counsel, and crisis management resources. Your job is to focus on building your department, not managing media relations. That evening, I drove home through the familiar streets of Portland with a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been overwhelming in the best possible way, packed with challenges and opportunities that would stretch my abilities and push me to grow professionally. But as I pulled into the parking spot outside my apartment building, I also felt a deeper sense of isolation than I'd experienced in years. The excitement of my new role, the satisfaction of professional validation, the anticipation of building something meaningful, all of it felt somehow incomplete because I had no family to share it with. For the first time since childhood, I had achieved something genuinely significant, and the people who should have been proudest of me were the same people who had tried to prevent it from happening. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "How was the first day? I want to hear everything." I smiled despite my emotional exhaustion. Family, I was learning, wasn't just about blood relationships, it was about the people who celebrated your successes, supported your dreams, and believed in your potential even when you struggled to believe in it yourself. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, already mentally composing the story I'd tell Chloe about corner offices and expansion budgets, and the surreal experience of sitting in strategy meetings about initiatives I'd be leading. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new media inquiries, and new steps in building the professional future I'd worked so hard to create. But tonight, I was content to sit in my small apartment, order takeout Chinese food, and appreciate the journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of the world a week ago was actually the beginning of something better than I had ever imagined. Over the following days, my routine at Innovate Tech began to take shape. Early mornings reviewing market research and competitor analyses, strategy sessions with the executive team, interviews with potential new hires, and client calls that introduced me to the business leaders who would be crucial to the success of our expansion initiative. The work was challenging but energizing. Each day brought new problems to solve, new opportunities to explore, and new evidence that I was exactly where I belonged professionally. My colleagues treated me with respect and deference that reflected my new role, but also with warmth that suggested genuine enthusiasm for the direction I was taking the department. "You know what's impressive about your approach," said Lisa Parker, the company's chief financial officer, after a budget meeting where we'd discussed investment priorities for the new department. "You're thinking 3 steps ahead. Most people in new leadership roles get caught up in immediate concerns, but you're already planning for challenges we won't face for 6 months." "I've had a lot of time to think about this expansion," I replied. "Sometimes forced patience works in your favor." "That's certainly true in your case." The media attention meanwhile continued to simmer in the background. 2 more reporters called during my first week, both asking variations of the same questions about discrimination allegations and family conflict. I referred them all to the company's communications team, and focused on my work. But the real test of my resolve came Thursday afternoon, when I received a call that I almost didn't answer. Mom's number, which I had ignored for over a week. "Rachel, honey, please don't hang up." Her voice sounded strained, older somehow, lacking the confident authority I'd grown up with. "I'm at work, Mom. This isn't a good time, I know, and I'm proud of you. I heard about your new position, and I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, I'm happy for your success." The words should have felt validating, but instead they felt hollow. Where was this pride and support when I needed it most? Where was this recognition of my achievements when Ashley was systematically undermining them? "Thank you," I said simply. "Rachel, we need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out of hand, and I'm afraid it's going to hurt everyone involved." Ashley never intended for things to go this far. Ashley never intended to get caught. That's not fair. She was desperate, Rachel. She's struggling financially, the girls need stability, and she thought this opportunity could change their lives. So she decided to destroy mine instead. Mom was quiet for a long moment. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But she's your sister. We're your family. Surely there's a way to work through this without lawyers and media attention and all this public drama." I looked out my office window at the city skyline, at the busy streets filled with people pursuing their own ambitions and dreams. For so long I had measured my worth against my family's expectations, had prioritized their approval over my own needs and goals. "Mom, I want you to understand something. I didn't create this situation. I didn't file legal complaints, or seek media attention, or turn this into public drama. Ashley did all of that when she decided that lying and manipulation were acceptable strategies for getting what she wanted. But you could make it stop. You could ask your company to drop their defense, to just let this all fade away quietly." The audacity of the request took my breath away. She wanted me to sacrifice my professional reputation and my company's interests to protect Ashley from the consequences of her own actions. I'm not going to sabotage my career to enable Ashley's bad choices. So you're just going to let your sister be destroyed. You're going to watch her lose any chance of finding decent work in this city. Ashley destroyed herself, Mom. I'm just refusing to go down with her. This isn't the Rachel I raised. The Rachel I know would never abandon her family when they needed her most. The Rachel you raised spent 30 years putting everyone else's needs ahead of her own. Maybe it's time for a different version. After I hung up, I sat in my office for several minutes, processing the conversation and its implications. Mom's call hadn't been about reconciliation or genuine concern for my well-being. It had been another attempt to manipulate me into prioritizing Ashley's interests over my own, but this time, the manipulation didn't work. This time, I was able to see it clearly for what it was and respond accordingly. The guilt that would have consumed me a month ago was replaced by a calm certainty that I was making the right choices for my own life and future. Friday brought news that would change the trajectory of the entire situation. Patricia called me into her office with an expression that was both serious and satisfied. "We've received some new information about your sister's complaint," she said, opening a thick folder on her desk. "Information that essentially resolves the legal matter in our favor." "What kind of information?" "It turns out that Ashley made similar allegations against 2 other companies in the past 18 months. Both cases were dismissed when it became clear that she had misrepresented her qualifications and fabricated key details about the hiring processes. She handed me copies of legal documents that painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception. Ashley hadn't just lied to Innovate Tech. She had developed a pattern of applying for positions she wasn't qualified for, using manipulation and false claims to gain consideration, then filing discrimination complaints when her deceptions were discovered. The State Labor Board investigator called this morning. Patricia continued. "Once they saw the pattern of behavior and the documentation we provided, they decided to fast-track the investigation. Ashley's complaint will likely be dismissed within the next 2 weeks, and the media attention should die down quickly once word gets out that the complaint was baseless. Reporters aren't usually interested in following up on stories that turn out to be false allegations." I felt a complex mix of relief and sadness as I processed this information. Relief that the professional threat was being resolved, but sadness at the confirmation of just how far Ashley's deception had extended. This wasn't a desperate mistake made in a moment of crisis. This was a calculated pattern of dishonesty that had affected multiple employers and probably other job candidates who had lost opportunities to her lies. "There is one more thing," Patricia said. The investigator asked if we wanted to pursue counterclaims for defamation and false allegations. "It's not something we typically do, but given the public nature of Ashley's accusations and the potential damage to our reputation, the legal team thinks we have a strong case." "What would that mean?" "Financial penalties, possible criminal charges for filing false reports, and a permanent record that would make it difficult for her to use the same tactics in the future." I thought about Ashley's daughters, about the financial struggles Mom had described, about the possibility that legal consequences could make their situation even more difficult. But I also thought about the other candidates who had been rejected in favor of Ashley's lies, about the companies that had wasted time and resources investigating her false claims, about the damage that systematic deception causes to trust and fairness in the hiring process. "I need some time to think about that," I said finally. "Of course, we don't need a decision immediately. But Rachel, I want you to know that whatever you decide, it won't affect your position here or our support for your leadership of the expansion initiative." That weekend, I found myself facing a choice that would define not just my relationship with Ashley, but my own understanding of justice, mercy, and personal responsibility. I could push for the harshest possible consequences for her actions, or I could focus on moving forward with my own life and let the natural consequences play out without additional intervention. Sunday morning, I met Chloe for coffee at our favorite cafe in the Pearl District. The autumn sun was filtering through the large windows, and the space was filled with the comfortable chatter of people enjoying their weekend routines. "You look different," Chloe said, as we settled into our usual corner table. More confident, more settled, like you've figured something out. I think I have. This whole situation with Ashley, it's forced me to really examine what I want from my life and what I'm willing to accept from other people. And what have you concluded? That I spent too many years trying to manage other people's emotions and consequences, that I prioritized keeping peace over standing up for myself, that I confused enabling bad behavior with being a good sister. Chloe nodded, thoughtfully. It's hard to break those patterns, especially with family. The thing is, I don't think Ashley is going to change, even if she faces serious consequences for what she's done. Even if she loses job opportunities or faces financial penalties, I don't think she's going to suddenly develop integrity or stop manipulating people to get what she wants. So what are you going to do? I'm going to focus on building something positive instead of tearing something negative down. I'm going to put all my energy into making the expansion initiative successful, into proving that competence and honesty are more powerful than manipulation and lie. That sounds like the right approach for you, but I'm also not going to protect her from the consequences of her choices anymore. If the company decides to pursue counterclaims, I'm not going to ask them to stop. If other employers find out about her pattern of deception, I'm not going to help her explain it away. You're choosing accountability over enabling. Exactly. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing my own well-being over my family's convenience. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the Sunday morning crowd drift in and out of the cafe. Young families with strollers, couples reading newspapers together, friends catching up over elaborate breakfast plates. Can I ask you something? Chloe said. Eventually. Of course. Do you miss them? Your mom and Ashley, I mean. Despite everything that's happened, do you miss having them in your life? I considered the question carefully. I miss the family I thought I miss the idea of unconditional support and shared celebrations, and people who are genuinely happy for your success. But I don't miss the reality of what my relationship with them actually was, which was exhausting. Constantly managing their crises, constantly minimizing my own needs, constantly working to earn approval that was never really available. I thought that was what family love looked like, but now I realize it was just a very sophisticated form of exploitation. Do you think you'll ever have a relationship with them again? Maybe someday, but it would have to be on completely different terms. They'd have to acknowledge what they did, take responsibility for the harm they caused, and demonstrate real change over time. And honestly, I don't think they're capable of that level of growth. When I got home that afternoon, I found a thick envelope that had been slipped under my apartment door. No return address, but I recognized Ashley's handwriting immediately. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long, that attempted to explain and justify everything that had happened. She wrote about her desperation as a single mother, about feeling like she had no options, about believing that I would understand and forgive because we were family. But what struck me most about the letter wasn't her explanations or her apologies, it was her complete inability to acknowledge that her actions had been wrong. Every paragraph contained some version of "I had no choice," or "I was forced to," or "anyone in my situation would have." She had reframed her deliberate deceptions as unfortunate necessities, her systematic lies as justified responses to difficult circumstances. There was no genuine remorse, no recognition of the harm she had caused, no commitment to different behavior in the future, just excuses and justifications and subtle attempts to make me feel guilty for not being more understanding. I read the letter twice, then placed it in the folder where I was keeping all the documentation related to the legal situation. Not because I planned to use it as evidence, but because I wanted to remember this moment of clarity, this confirmation that my instincts about Ashley's character had been correct. Monday morning, I called Patricia to let her know my decision about the counterclaim. I want the company to pursue whatever legal remedies you think are appropriate, I said, not out of spite, but because I think there needs to be accountability for this kind of systematic deception. Are you sure? I know this involves your family, and that can't be easy. I'm sure Ashley made her choices, and now she needs to live with the consequences. My job is to focus on building something positive, not protecting people from the results of their own bad behavior. Understood. I'll let the legal team know. After I hung up, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing throughout this entire ordeal. I had made my choice, set my boundaries, and committed to a path forward that prioritized integrity and accountability over family loyalty and false peace. The expansion initiative was moving forward with the kind of momentum that suggested genuine success was possible. My team was coming together, our client outreach was generating enthusiastic responses, and the market research was confirming that our strategy was sound. More importantly, I was discovering that I was capable of leadership in ways I had never fully realized. The skills I had developed through years of managing family crises, mediating conflicts, and solving other people's problems were translating beautifully into corporate strategy and team management. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with people who valued my contributions and supported my growth. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of the world 3 weeks ago was actually the beginning of the life I had always wanted but had never quite believed I deserved. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you are actually the universe clearing space for the best things to enter your life. Sometimes losing the family you thought you had makes room for the professional family you were meant to find. And sometimes the people who try to destroy your dreams accidentally hand you the key to dreams, bigger and better than anything you had ever imagined possible. 6 months later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Seattle conference room, watching the late spring rain create abstract patterns on the glass while waiting for our newest client to arrive. The view stretched across Elliott Bay toward the Olympic Mountains, a panorama that still felt surreal considering where my life had been just half a year ago. My reflection in the window showed someone I barely recognized from that devastated woman who had discovered her family's betrayal in a cramped living room in Portland. The expansion initiative had exceeded every projection we'd made. What started as an ambitious plan to establish Innovate Tech's presence in the Pacific Northwest had evolved into something that was reshaping the entire company's growth strategy. We now had offices in 3 cities, a team of 28 professionals, and a client roster that included some of the most innovative companies in the region. Rachel, they're here, called Marcus Chen, my newest hire and the manager of our Seattle operation. Marcus had come to us from Amazon with 15 years of experience in enterprise software sales, and his knowledge of the local market had been invaluable in establishing our credibility with potential clients. I turned from the window, straightening my navy blazer and checking my notes one final time. Today's meeting was with Emerald City Logistics, a rapidly growing supply chain management company that represented exactly the kind of client we'd built our expansion around. Mid-size, tech-forward, hungry for solutions that could scale with their growth. Rachel Martinez, the woman who entered the conference room, was probably in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested someone accustomed to making important decisions. I'm Sarah Kim, CEO of Emerald City Logistics. I've been looking forward to this meeting. Ms. Kim, the pleasure is entirely mine. Thank you for taking the time to consider our proposal. What followed was exactly the kind of strategic conversation I had dreamed about during those long months of preparation and uncertainty. Sarah asked probing questions about our methodology, challenged our assumptions about her industry, and pushed us to demonstrate real understanding of her company's unique challenge. By the end of 90 minutes, we had not only secured a contract worth over $200,000 annually, but had also identified opportunities for additional services that could double that revenue within the first year. I have to say, Sarah mentioned as we were wrapping up, your reputation in the industry preceded you. Several colleagues mentioned that Innovate Tech's Northwest expansion was being led by someone with exceptional strategic insight. That's very generous of them to say. It's not generosity, it's recognition. Word travels fast in our circles and people are taking notice of what you've built here. After she left, Marcus and I spent an hour debriefing the meeting and planning our implementation strategy. This was the part of the work I loved most, the detailed planning that would transform a signed contract into measurable results for our client and sustainable revenue for our company. You know what's impressive about how you handle these meetings, Marcus said as we were packing up our materials. You never oversell, you ask questions, listen to the answers, and then propose solutions that actually address what they need, rather than just what we want to sell them. That's because I genuinely care about their success, I replied. Our growth is directly tied to their growth, so there's no incentive to promise things we can't deliver. It's refreshing. A lot of leaders I've worked with are so focused on hitting their own numbers that they lose sight of whether they're actually helping their client. The drive back to Portland gave me time to reflect on how dramatically my professional life had changed since accepting this role. The challenges I faced now were complex and demanding, but they were also energizing in ways I had never experienced before. Every problem was an opportunity to innovate. Every client conversation was a chance to demonstrate value. Every successful implementation was proof that our strategy was sound. More importantly, I had discovered that I was genuinely good at this work, not just competent, but exceptional. The strategic thinking skills I had developed through years of managing family crises translated beautifully into business planning. The communication abilities I had honed through mediating conflicts served me well in client negotiation. The resilience I had built through navigating personal betrayals made me unflappable in high-pressure business situations. It was almost 6 o'clock when I finally made it back to my Portland office, but the building was still humming with activity. One of the advantages of leading a rapidly growing department was that there was always something happening, always progress being made on multiple fronts simultaneously. Rachel, perfect timing, called Patricia Wong as I passed her office. Do you have a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Patricia's office had become a familiar space over the past months, the place where we regularly strategized about team development, budget allocations, and long-term plan. But tonight, her expression suggested something more significant than our usual operational discussions. How was the Seattle meeting? Excellent. We landed the Emerald City contract, and they're already talking about expanding our scope for next quarter. Outstanding. That puts us ahead of our Q2 targets by almost 15%. It does. Marcus has been instrumental in building relationships up there. His local knowledge has opened doors that would have taken us months to access otherwise. Patricia nodded, making notes in the leather portfolio she always carried. That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss with you. Your success with the expansion initiative has gotten attention at the highest levels of the company. What kind of attention? The kind that leads to conversations about your long-term trajectory here at Innovate Tech. Rachel, Daniel, and the board have been incredibly impressed with what you've accomplished in such a short time. You've not only met every goal we established, you've exceeded them while building a team culture that other departments are trying to emulate. I felt a familiar flutter of excitement, mixed with apprehension. In my experience, conversations about long-term trajectory could lead either to amazing opportunities or to unrealistic expectations that set you up for failure. What specifically are they considering? A promotion to Vice President of Regional Development, with responsibility for expansion initiatives beyond the Pacific Northwest. They're talking about California, Arizona, potentially even international markets down the road. The scope of what she was describing took my breath away. 6 months ago I had been hoping for a basic marketing manager position. Now they were discussing making me a company officer with responsibility for initiatives that could span multiple countries. That's incredibly flattering, but it also sounds like a massive responsibility. It is, and that's why they want to move carefully, make sure you have all the support and resources you need to succeed at that level. They're talking about additional budget, expanded team, maybe even equity participation in the company. Equity participation, stock options, profit sharing, the kind of long-term incentives that align your success with the company's success. Rachel, they're not just offering you a job anymore, they're offering you the opportunity to become a true partner in building something significant. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the implications of what Patricia was describing. This wasn't just career advancement, it was transformation into the kind of business leader I had admired from afar, but never imagined becoming myself. When would this transition happen? That's partly up to you. They want to make sure you feel ready for the expanded responsibility. Daniel suggested starting with some additional strategic projects this summer. gradually building up to the full vice president role by the end of the year. And the Pacific Northwest expansion would continue, under your oversight, but with additional management layers so you could focus on broader strategic initiatives. Think of it as scaling your impact rather than just scaling your workload. After Patricia and I finished our conversation, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the windows of the downtown building. The city looked different from this perspective, not just geographically but metaphorically. I was no longer looking up at the heights I hoped to reach someday. I was looking out from a position of genuine influence and responsibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Dinner tonight. I have news to share and I'm dying to hear about your Seattle meeting." "Absolutely, and I have some pretty significant news to share too." We met at Nostrana, the Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated my college graduation and my first real job and every other milestone worth commemorating over the year. Chloe was already waiting at our usual corner table, practically vibrating with excitement about whatever news she was carrying. "Okay, you look like someone who just conquered the world," she said before I'd even sat down. "Tell me everything about Seattle." I filled her in on the client meeting, the successful contract negotiation, and the growing momentum of the expansion initiative. But as I talked, I could see her expression shift from excitement to something deeper, more emotional. "Chloe, what's wrong? You look like you're about to cry." "I'm not about to cry. I am crying. Happy tears, though." "Rachel, do you realize what you've accomplished? Do you understand how far you've come since that horrible day when your family betrayed you?" I try not to dwell on comparisons. I'm not talking about dwelling. I'm talking about celebrating. 6 months ago, you were devastated because you thought your career was over. Now you're leading initiatives that are reshaping a major company and getting offered promotions that most people work decades to achieve. She was right, of course. The transformation had been so gradual, so focused on daily challenges and immediate goals, that I hadn't stepped back to appreciate the full scope of what had changed. "What's your news?" I asked, redirecting the conversation away from my own achievements. "I got engaged." The words hit me with a rush of genuine joy that temporarily displaced my thoughts about work and promotions. Chloe had been dating James for 2 years, and while I'd suspected their relationship was heading in this direction, the reality of it still felt wonderfully momentous. "Oh my God, Chloe, when? How? I want to hear everything." She launched into the story of James's proposal, which involved a hike to Multnomah Falls and a ring hidden in a picnic basket, and all the romantic details that made perfect sense for their relationship. As she talked, I felt a complex mix of emotion, overwhelming happiness for my best friend, but also a strange sense of melancholy about my own romantic life. The past 6 months had been so consumed with professional challenges and family drama that I hadn't given much thought to dating or relationship. The few men I'd met through work or social events had seemed pleasant enough, but none had sparked the kind of interest that would motivate me to carve time out of my demanding schedule. "I have a confession," Chloe said after she'd finished describing the engagement. "One of the reasons I wanted to have dinner tonight was to ask you to be my maid of honor." "Of course, I would be honored, literally honored. There's something else though. Something I've been wanting to talk to you about for a while." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious, and I braced myself for whatever emotional conversation was coming. "I'm worried that you're so focused on work, so determined to prove yourself professionally, that you're not leaving room for other kinds of fulfillment in your life." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've built an incredible career, but you're also spending 60 hours a week at the office, checking emails at 10 o'clock at night, and turning down social invitations because you have client presentations to prepare. That's temporary. Once the expansion initiative is more established, once I have more senior team members handling day-to-day operations, I'll have more work-life balance. Will you? Because from what you just told me about the promotion they're considering, it sounds like the responsibilities are only going to get bigger and more demanding." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it as I realized she had a point. The vice president role Patricia had described would involve even more travel, even more strategic planning, even more high-stakes decision-making. If I accepted it, the intensity of my professional life would increase, not decrease. I'm not saying you should turn down opportunities, Chloe continued. I'm just saying that I want you to be intentional about what kind of life you're building. Professional success is amazing, but it's not the only thing that matters. I know that. Because sometimes it seems like you're so determined to prove that you don't need your family's approval or support, that you're not allowing yourself to need anyone at all. Her words hit closer to home than I was comfortable admitting. The independence I had fought so hard to achieve, the self-reliance that had carried me through the darkest moments of family betrayal, had perhaps become too complete, too isolating. I just want to make sure I'm established professionally before I complicate my life with personal relationships. But when will you feel established enough? When you're a vice president? When you're a CEO? When you own your own company? There's always going to be another goal, another achievement, that seems necessary before you can focus on other aspects of your life. We spent the rest of dinner talking about balance, priorities, and the challenge of building a life that included both professional fulfillment and personal happiness. By the time we said goodbye, I had agreed to be more open to social opportunities and to seriously consider whether the vice president promotion was what I actually wanted, or just what I thought I should want. The drive home took me through the neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where I'd learned to read, and the high school where I'd discovered my love of strategic thinking through debate team. It was strange how familiar these streets still felt, despite how much my life had changed since I'd last driven them regularly. Without consciously deciding to, I found myself turning onto Oak Street, slowing as I approached the house where Mom and Ashley still lived. The porch light was on, and I could see the flicker of television through the front window. For a moment, I considered stopping, knocking on the door, attempting some kind of reconciliation or closure. But as quickly as the impulse arose, it faded. Not because I was still angry, but because I realized there was nothing there for me anymore. The people in that house were connected to me by genetics and shared history, but they weren't my family in any meaningful sense. They had demonstrated repeatedly that they were willing to sacrifice my well-being for their own convenience, and no amount of time or distance was likely to change that fundamental dynamic. My real family was Chloe, whose engagement had reminded me what genuine love and support looked like. My real family was the team I'd built at Innovate Tech, colleagues who celebrated my successes and collaborated toward shared goals. My real family was the network of professional relationships I'd developed, people who valued my expertise and trusted my judgment. I drove past the house without stopping, feeling a sense of peace about that choice that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. The following Monday brought a meeting that would define the next phase of my career. Daniel Brooks had invited me to present my thoughts on the proposed vice president role to the full board of directors, an opportunity to share my vision for regional development, and to demonstrate my readiness for expanded responsibility. I spent the weekend preparing a presentation that balanced ambitious strategic thinking with realistic operational planning. The board wanted to see evidence that I could think beyond the Pacific Northwest Initiative, that I could develop frameworks and processes that would scale across multiple markets and time zones. The boardroom was intimidating in the way that only rooms designed for important decisions can be. 12 executives sat around a polished mahogany table, each representing years of business experience and millions of dollars in company value. But as I began my presentation, the nervousness I'd expected to feel was replaced by genuine excitement about the opportunity to share ideas I'd been developing for months. The success of our Pacific Northwest expansion has taught us several things about market entry strategy, I began, clicking to a slide that showed our client acquisition timeline and revenue growth. First, that regional expertise matters more than national brand recognition when you're targeting mid-size companies. Second, that building trust takes time but creates sustainable competitive advantage. Third, that the most effective growth comes from understanding local business cultures rather than imposing standardized approaches. I walked them through case studies from our Seattle and Spokane offices, demonstrating how we'd adapted our service offerings to meet specific regional needs, while maintaining the core value propositions that made Innovate Tech attractive to clients nationwide. Based on these learnings, I believe our expansion strategy should prioritize depth over breadth, I continue. Rather than trying to establish a presence in every major market simultaneously, we should focus on becoming the dominant player in carefully selected regions before moving to the next phase of growth. The questions that followed were probing and thoughtful, exactly the kind of strategic conversation I'd hoped to have. Board members asked about competitive threats, operational challenges, financial projections, and scalability concerns. Each question gave me an opportunity to demonstrate not just my knowledge of our current operations, but my ability to think strategically about challenges we hadn't yet encountered. "Rachel," said Victoria Martinez, the board member who chaired the Strategic Planning Committee, "you've clearly given a lot of thought to the strategic framework for expansion, but I'm curious about your perspective on the personal demands of this role. Leading regional operations across multiple time zones, managing teams you can't see face-to-face regularly, traveling extensively to maintain client relationships. How do you envision balancing those demands with your own well-being?" It was exactly the question Chloe would have wanted them to ask, and I was grateful for our dinner conversation that had forced me to think seriously about the answer. "That's an excellent question, and one I've been reflecting on carefully. I believe sustainable success in a role like this requires being intentional about both professional systems and personal boundaries. On the professional side, I would want to invest heavily in developing strong regional managers who can handle day-to-day operations with minimal oversight. On the personal side, I would want to establish clear expectations about communication during off hours and protected time for relationships and activities outside of work. And you feel confident that you can maintain those boundaries given the scope of responsibility we're discussing. I feel confident that I can establish systems and processes that make it possible. The alternative, burning out from overwork or sacrificing personal relationships for professional achievement, ultimately serves no one's interest. After the presentation, I waited in my office while the board deliberated. The outcome would determine not just my title and compensation, but the entire trajectory of my career for the next several years. If they offered me the promotion, I would need to decide whether accepting it aligned with the life I actually wanted to build or just the life I thought I should want. An hour later, Daniel knocked on my office door with an expression that was difficult to read. "Rachel, the board was impressed with your presentation and your strategic thinking. They appreciate your honesty about the challenges of the role and your thoughtful approach to managing those challenges. I sense there's a but coming. Not a but exactly, more of an and. They'd like to offer you the vice president position, but with a modified structure that addresses some of the concerns you raised about work-life balance." He sat down across from my desk, pulling out a folder that contained what appeared to be a formal job description and compensation package. "Instead of immediate responsibility for all regional expansion, they're proposing a phased approach. You would start by overseeing the Western United States, with plans to expand your scope as we successfully establish operations in California and Arizona. The role would include 2 additional senior managers to handle operational details, allowing you to focus on strategy and client relationships. And the compensation, a 30% increase in base salary, equity participation in the company, and a travel budget that includes provisions for bringing key team members to you rather than requiring constant travel on your part." The offer was generous beyond anything I had imagined when I first interviewed for the basic marketing manager position. It represented validation of my abilities, recognition of my contributions, and confidence in my potential for future growth. "There's one more element," Daniel continued. "The board would like you to know that this promotion path could lead to even more significant opportunities within the next few years. They see you as someone with the potential for executive leadership, possibly even CEO succession planning." The words hung in the air like something from a dream. 6 months ago I had been hoping to advance from coordinator to manager. Now they were discussing the possibility of my eventually leading the entire company. "When would you need an answer?" "Take all the time you need. This is a significant decision that will affect every aspect of your life. We want you to be completely certain that it's the right move for you." That evening, I found myself back at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, watching the lights of Portland twinkle in the darkness below. The city looked different now than it had when I first started working in this building, not because anything had physically changed, but because my relationship to it had evolved. This wasn't just the place where I worked anymore. It was the place where I had built something meaningful, where I had proven my capabilities, where I had transformed from someone seeking opportunities into someone creating them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and for a moment I felt the old anxiety about potentially unwanted contact from my family. But when I opened the message, it was from Sarah Kim, the CEO of Emerald City Logistics. Rachel, I wanted to let you know that our first quarter results exceeded projections by 12%, largely due to the efficiency improvements your team implemented. Thank you for delivering exactly what you promised. Messages like that had become increasingly common over the past month. Clients reaching out to express appreciation, colleagues seeking advice on strategic challenges, industry contacts inviting me to speak at conferences or participate in panel discussions. I had built a reputation based on competence and integrity, and that reputation was creating opportunities I had never actively pursued. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Ashley had tried to advance her career through lies and manipulation, I had achieved far greater success by focusing on delivering genuine value to others. The shortcuts she had attempted had ultimately led to professional ruin, while the long path of skill development and relationship building had led to recognition and advancement beyond my most optimistic projection. I spent the weekend thinking seriously about Daniel's offer, weighing the professional opportunities against the personal costs, considering what kind of life I wanted to build over the next decade. The promotion represented everything I had thought I wanted, but Chloe's questions about balance and sustainability had forced me to examine whether my goals had evolved since I first started pursuing them. Sunday afternoon, I drove to the Oregon coast, something I'd been meaning to do for months, but had never found time for. The Pacific stretched endlessly toward the horizon, waves rolling in with the kind of rhythmic consistency that makes it easy to lose track of time and perspective. As I walked along the beach, breathing in the salt air and feeling the sand shift beneath my feet, I realized that for the first time in years I wasn't thinking about work or family drama, or professional advancement. I was simply present in the moment, appreciating the beauty around me, and the sense of peace that came from having nothing urgent to accomplish. That feeling of peace, I realized, was what had been missing from my life during the intense months of building the expansion initiative. The work had been fulfilling and the success had been validating, but I had been so focused on proving myself that I had forgotten to enjoy the process of growth and achievement. The decision about the vice president role crystallized during that walk on the beach. I wanted to accept the promotion, but with modifications that would allow me to maintain the sense of balance and perspective I was experiencing in that moment. I wanted to build something significant professionally while also building a personal life that included relationships, hobbies, travel for pleasure rather than just business, and the kind of spontaneous experiences that make life rich and meaningful. Monday morning, I called Daniel to request a meeting to discuss my response to the board's offer. I'm interested in accepting the vice president position, I told him, but I'd like to propose some additional modifications to the structure. What kind of modification? I want to establish a 4-day workweek during non-travel periods, with Fridays protected for personal time unless there are genuine emergencies. I want to limit business travel to 2 weeks per month maximum. And I want to establish clear expectations that my team members can contact me during off hours only for truly urgent issues. Daniel leaned back in his chair considering my proposal. Those are significant requests. What's driving them? The recognition that sustainable success requires sustainable practices. I want to be excellent in this role for years, not just months. That means establishing patterns now that will prevent burnout and maintain the kind of strategic thinking you're hiring me for. And you believe these boundaries are compatible with the level of responsibility we're discussing? I believe they're essential to the level of responsibility you're discussing. The most effective leaders I know are those who model healthy boundaries and sustainable practices for their team. Give me a few days to discuss this with the board. But Rachel, I appreciate your thoughtfulness about this. Too many people accept promotions without considering the long-term implications, then struggle when the reality doesn't match their expectations. 3 days later, Patricia called to let me know that the board had approved my modified proposal. The vice president role would be mine, with the boundary conditions I had requested, and a start date that would give me time to transition my current responsibilities gradually. They were impressed with your negotiation approach, Patricia said. The fact that you were willing to push back on aspects of the offer that didn't serve your long-term interests demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking they want in a company officer. The promotion was announced internally the following week, generating congratulations from colleagues and team members who had watched me build the expansion initiative from the ground up. But the message that meant the most came from Marcus Chen in Seattle. Rachel, I wanted you to know that working with you over the past months has changed how I think about leadership. You've shown me that it's possible to be ambitious and successful while also being generous and supportive of others. Thank you for being the kind of boss I hope to become someday. That evening, Chloe and I celebrated at the same restaurant where we'd discussed her engagement and my career questions just a few weeks earlier. The conversation was lighter this time, filled with excitement about her wedding planning and my new role, but also deeper appreciation for the journey that had brought us both to this point. I'm proud of how you handled the promotion negotiations, she said over dessert. 6 months ago you would have accepted whatever they offered without considering whether it was actually good for you long term. 6 months ago I was so focused on proving my worth that I wouldn't have recognized the difference between an opportunity and a trap. And now I understand that my worth isn't something I need to prove to anyone, it's something I demonstrate through my choices and my work, but it exists independently of external validation. As I drove home that night, I found myself thinking about the woman who had walked into that devastating family confrontation 6 months early. She had been so hungry for approval, so willing to sacrifice her own needs for other people's convenience, so convinced that her value was determined by how useful she could be to others. The woman driving home tonight was fundamentally different, not harder or more cynical, but clearer about her own worth and more intentional about her choices. She had learned that family loyalty couldn't be one-sided, that professional success meant nothing without personal fulfillment, and that the most important relationships are those built on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The legal situation with Ashley had been resolved months earlier, just as Patricia had predicted. The complaint was dismissed, the counterclaims resulted in financial penalties and a permanent record that would make similar tactics difficult in the future, and the media attention faded once it became clear that the allegations were baseless. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ashley had eventually found work at a small marketing firm in Eugene, far enough from Portland that her reputation there was starting fresh. Mom had apparently taken a part-time job to help with household expenses, and both of them had moved on to creating explanations for the situation that didn't require them to acknowledge their own roles in what had happened. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but also no guilt about the consequences they were facing. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. The difference was that my choices had been guided by integrity and long-term thinking, while theirs had been guided by short-term convenience and wishful thinking about avoiding accountability. 3 months into my new role as Vice President of Regional Development, I received an invitation that completed the transformation that had begun with my family's betrayal. The Portland Business Journal wanted to feature me in their 40 Under 40 list, recognizing young professionals who were making significant contributions to the regional business community. The photo shoot took place in my office, with the city skyline visible through the windows behind me. As the photographer worked, I thought about how surreal it was to be celebrated publicly for achievements that had grown out of what had initially felt like the worst experience of my life. "You look confident," the photographer commented as he adjusted his lighting. "Like someone who knows exactly where she belongs." He was right, I did know where I belonged, not just in this office, or this role, but in this life I had built based on my own values and priorities. I belonged in relationships with people who celebrated my successes rather than undermining them. I belonged in work that challenged me intellectually while allowing me to maintain personal boundaries. I belonged in a city that rewarded innovation and integrity rather than manipulation and convenience. The article, when it was published, described me as a strategic visionary who has transformed Innovate Tech's regional presence, while modeling sustainable leadership practices for the next generation of business professionals. It mentioned the expansion initiative's success, the team I had built, and the client relationships that had driven unprecedented growth, but what it couldn't capture was the deeper transformation that had made all of that professional success possible. The journey from seeking approval to deserving respect, the evolution from managing other people's crises to creating my own opportunities, the growth from defining myself in relation to others to establishing my own independent identity. That evening, I sat in my apartment, reading congratulatory messages from colleagues, clients, and friends. The apartment itself had evolved over the months, decorated now with art I'd chosen because I loved it, furnished with pieces that reflected my own taste rather than budget constraints, filled with books and plants and small luxuries that made it feel like a sanctuary rather than just a place to sleep. One message stood out from the others: sent from an email address I didn't recognize but signed with a name that made me pause. Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had first called me about Ashley's discrimination complaint 6 months earlier. Rachel, I wanted to reach out to congratulate you on your recognition in the Business Journal. I've been following your career trajectory since our brief conversation last year, and I'm impressed by how you've handled both the challenges and the opportunities that have come your way. Would you be interested in participating in a longer feature article about rising leaders in Portland's tech industry? I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the anxiety I'd felt when she first called, the fear that my family's drama would derail my professional aspirations. Now she was asking to feature me as an example of successful leadership, proof that focusing on competence and integrity ultimately triumphs over attempts at manipulation and shortcuts. I composed a response accepting her invitation, then leaned back in my chair and smiled at the perfect circularity of it all. The media attention that had once threatened to destroy my reputation was now celebrating achievements that wouldn't have been possible without the clarity that came from surviving that threat. Sometimes the worst betrayals force you to discover strengths you never knew you possessed. Sometimes losing the family you thought you had makes space for the life you were actually meant to build. And sometimes the people who try to tear you down accidentally push you toward heights you never would have reached if they had simply supported you from the beginning. The view from my apartment window showed Portland settling into the quiet rhythm of evening, lights beginning to twinkle in office buildings and restaurants as the city prepared for another night. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with family conflicts, professional disappointments, and the challenge of building lives that reflected their values, rather than other people's expectations. I thought about that woman I used to be, the one who had measured her worth by her family's approval and sacrificed her own needs for other people's convenience. I wished I could tell her that the betrayal she was about to experience would ultimately be the best thing that ever happened to her. That losing the support she thought she needed would force her to discover the strengths she already possessed, but maybe that's a lesson everyone has to learn for themselves. Maybe the only way to truly understand your own worth is to have it tested by people who should have protected it but chose to exploit it instead. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Chloe. Saw the article, so proud of who you've become, coffee tomorrow to celebrate. I typed back immediately, absolutely. I have more good news to share. The good news was that I had finally learned the difference between being strong enough to endure other people's bad behavior and being wise enough to refuse to accept it. The good news was that I had built a life based on my own values, rather than my family's expectations. The good news was that I had discovered what genuine success felt like when it wasn't shadowed by the fear of losing approval or disappointing people who had never really supported me in the first place. The good news was that sometimes the people who betray you accidentally set you free to become the person you were always meant to be, and sometimes that freedom is the greatest gift they could have given you, even if they never intended it that way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.